Holy moly, guys. Technology can be great. It can be such a bummer sometimes. I was about 8 minutes into the last video and everything just shut down. So we're doing another retake. Anyway, let's just go ahead and jump into scripture. Let's see. You can see part of my shirt here. It says Jesus loves. It says Jesus loves you, and Lord knows I'm trying. And so that's very true for most of us, huh? All right, guys, so we're going to follow right along in the chronology that we've been in. And so in Matthew 17, it is 9 through 27. And then we jump over to Mark 9, and it is 9 through 32. And then in Luke, it's actually only 36 through 45. And so Luke doesn't have the exact same accounts that Matthew and Mark have. But he does in a boy being healed in the transfiguration on the mount, right, that we just did. So we're actually going to start in Mark, and we will read Mark and Matthew's first section here about this, and then we'll talk about it, about Elijah. And we left off with the transfiguration, right? And so this was Jesus turning as bright as a white light, essentially, right? And so they saw Elijah, Moses, and Jesus talking on a mountain together. And then when they opened their eyes again, Jesus was alone, right? And so they thought that Jesus was fulfilling the Feast of Tabernacles, right? They wanted to build a tabernacle for each one of them, a temple for praise. And so that's where we left off. So we'll go ahead and jump right into Mark 9, verse 9. Okay, so as they came down from the mountain, right, where they just were, he commanded them that they should tell no one the things that they had seen till the Son of Man has risen from the dead. So they kept this word to themselves, questioning what the rising of the dead meant. And they asked him, saying, What do the scribes say that Elijah must come first? And then he answered and said to them, Indeed, Elijah is coming first, and restores all things. And how is it written concerning the Son of Man, that he must suffer many things and be treated with contempt? But I say to you, Elijah has also come. And they did to him whatever they wished, as it is written of him. Now let's jump over to Matthew. Luke actually doesn't have this particular story. So let's go over to Matthew 9:9. Same thing. Or excuse me, Matthew 17:9. Okay. Now as they came down from the mountain, Jesus commanded them, saying, Tell the vision to no one until the Son of Man is risen from the dead. And the disciples asked him, saying, Why then do the scribes say that Elijah must come first? And Jesus answered and said to them, Indeed, Elijah is coming first, and will restore all things. But I say to you that Elijah has already come, and they did not know him, but did to him whatever they wished. Likewise, the Son of Man is also about to suffer at their hands. Then the disciples understood that he spoke to them of John the Baptist. So in Luke 1:17, we see that Gabriel is talking to Zechariah, right? And he's about to tell him, or is telling him, that he is going to bear a son, which is going to be John the Baptist, right? And he prophesies that he will come in the spirit and the power of Elijah. And so that's part of what we're seeing here Jesus speaking of, right? And over in John 1:21, we see the disciples had asked John, the Gospel John, right, if he was Elijah, and he told them no. So we're talking about John the Baptist, right? And so had the kingdom come, right? They rejected their Messiah, but had they not, and had Jesus came to bring the kingdom come, right? Had the kingdom come, then John would have fulfilled that prophecy of Elijah, of him restoring all things. However, right, they rejected their Messiah. And so that's what they are speaking of right here. Now, let's carry on here. Let's just go ahead and pick up in Matthew since we're here. Okay, 17:14. And when they had come to the multitude, a man came to him, kneeling down to him, saying, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is an epileptic, and suffers severely. For he often falls into the fire, and often into the water. So I brought him to your disciples, but they could not cure him. Then Jesus answered and said, O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him here to me. And Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him, and the child was cured from that very hour. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, Why could we not cast it out? So Jesus said to them, Because your unbelief. For assuredly I say to you, if you have the faith of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, Move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. However, this kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting. Let's jump over to Mark, and we'll be in 9:14. Let's go ahead and read that same story. We have a little bit more details here. And when he came to the disciples, he saw a great multitude around them, and scribes disputing with them. And immediately when he saw them, all the people were greatly amazed, running to him, greeted him, and asked the scribes, What are you discussing with them? And then the one from the crowd answered, Teacher, I brought you my son, who has a mute spirit, and wherever it seizes him, it throws him down. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. So I spoke to your disciples, that they should cast it out, but they could not. He answered him and said, O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him to me. Then they brought him to him. And when he saw him, immediately the spirit convulsed him, and he fell on the ground and wallowed, foaming at the mouth. So he asked his father, How long has this been happening to him? And he said, From childhood. And often he has thrown him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. And Jesus said to him, If you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes. And immediately the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. And when Jesus saw that the people came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, to it saying, Deaf and dumb spirit, I command you, come out of him and enter him no more. The spirit cried out, convulsed him greatly, and came out of him. And because he became as one dead, so that many said, He is dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. And when he had come into the house, the disciples asked him privately, Why could we not cast it out? And so he said to them, This can only come by nothing but prayer and fasting. And so what we're gathering from this story here is that this young child has a terrible demon, right? Foaming and seizing, throwing him into fire and water. And so this is this horrific thing here. And a couple things are going to happen, and we'll talk about that. But one of them was remember, after the fall of and the unbelief, right, the rejection of their Messiah, one of the things was that you now had to be a believer before Jesus performed a miracle. And so we have that description here up here in 23, and he says, if you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes. And so we have the man is admitting, sorry, I have children and offering some kind of game thing there. And so the man is admitting his belief first, right? So then the Lord rebukes the spirit. Notice he says deaf and dumb spirit, right? We learned that actually during the great rejection, right? The unpardonable sin, that this is a messianic miracle. Only God himself can command a deaf and dumb spirit to be released from somebody, right? The typical rituals, you have to know the name of the spirit to be able to converse with it and command him out. So this is a messianic miracle. It can only be done by Jesus. However, we see something that seems like it would conflict with that, right? We have the disciples trying to cast out this demon. They can't. And we have Jesus saying, faithless generation, right? How long shall I bear with you? And then, of course, he casts him out and says, this kind can come out by nothing but prayer and fasting. He is not saying that had they prayed and fasted, they would have been able to do it, right? We know that this is a messianic miracle. They could not have done it. What he's calling them, when he calls them this faithless generation, is that when they couldn't do it, they just simply gave up and, essentially whined to Jesus. Well, why can't we do it? What he is saying to them is that they should have come to the Father in prayer and fasting. They should have made these requests to him, right? Because had they had the faith in the Father, right, that he could do it and handle these things, just like that's why Jesus told him over in Matthew, right, if you'd had the faith of a mustard seed, you can tell this mountain to move and it would move, right? And so they just gave up, right? And so a part of the fasting is a totally different topic, but we know that typically with fasting comes the replacement of food with the time with the Lord, right? Dwelling in his word, praying, talking with him, right? Becoming closer, relying on him for that sustenance, right? And so what Jesus is kind of reprimanding them for is that not that they couldn't perform the miracle, right? It's a messianic miracle. They wouldn't have been able to do it. What he's upset about is their lack of faith, right? It's not that they just couldn't do it. It's that they couldn't do it and then they didn't take it to the Lord. They didn't go to the Father in prayer and fasting, right, for understanding for what they should do next and how they should handle it. Instead, it was just this conversation of, oh, how come we couldn't do it, right? And so that's what Jesus is saying here. Now, let's carry on. Let's see, we're in Mark 9. So in 9, we go all the way up to 32. So let's continue to read 30 through 32 here, okay? Then they departed from there and passed through Galilee, and he did not want anyone to know it. For he taught his disciples and said to them, the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And after he is killed, he will rise on the third day. But they did not understand this, and they were afraid to ask him. Now let's go on over to Luke. Luke just talked about that boy being healed, but there wasn't as much information there, so we didn't read it in Luke. But 43 through 45 here, okay? They were all amazed at the majesty of God. So this was right after this messianic miracle, okay? But while everyone marveled at all the things which Jesus did, he said to his disciples, let these words sink down into your ears, for the Son of Man is about to be betrayed into the hands of men. But they did not understand this saying, and it was hidden from them, so they did not perceive it, and they were afraid to ask him about this saying. Now let's jump over to Matthew 17, and we'll read 22 here. Okay? Now while they were staying in Galilee, Jesus said to them, the Son of Man is about to be betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and on the third day he will be raised up. And they were exceedingly sorrowful. And so there's not much to speak about on behalf of this. It's kind of clear. Of course, sorry, I'm adjusting it so I can read. I've got the camera there. And so, of course, he is, predicting and telling them, right, what's about to happen, right? He's about to go to the cross. They're sorrowful. They're afraid, the different terminology we had here. But look in Mark, in Luke. Look what Luke said, and it said, not only did they not understand it, okay, but it was hidden from them, so they did not perceive it, right? And so this is kind of along the lines of their unbelief, right, which is what was just happening with Jesus right before this. Them not having the faith and the belief. They don't quite understand why Jesus needs to go to the cross, right? They're not understanding the first and second coming. And so it's their lack of faith, right, in Jesus. And so it was actually, the knowledge was actually hidden from them, so they couldn't perceive it, right? And so, and it's kind of like what happens to like the Pharisees as well, right? Their hearts are hardened because they don't want to hear truth. They don't want to have an understanding. And that's kind of where his disciples are at right this moment. And so now let's jump over to Matthew. Matthew has this account here, and we'll finish up this little section. So we're going to read the rest of Matthew 17. Okay, starting in verse 24. When they had come to Capernaum, those who received the temple tax came to Peter and said, does your teacher not pay the temple tax? And he said, yes. And when he had come into the house, Jesus anticipated him, saying, what do you think, Simon? From who do the kings of earth take custom or taxes? From their sons or from strangers? And Peter said to him, from strangers. And Jesus said to him, the sons are free. Nevertheless, lest we offend them, go to the sea, cast in a hook and take the fish that comes up first, and when you have opened its mouth, you will find a piece of money. Take that and give it to them for me and you. So during this time, they collected a temple tax, which was half a shekel per man. Now, notice that Peter just took it upon himself to answer on behalf of Jesus. Okay, we don't see here that he went to Jesus first, and we know that he didn't based off of Jesus's response, right? And so he just went ahead and answered, and they're like, is Jesus not paying taxes here? And he, oh, yes, 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 he does, right? Come on, Peter. And so, we have Jesus saying, anticipated him. Jesus knew he was coming, and he knew it happened. And so they didn't have to have a conversation first, right? Jesus is like, okay, so let's talk about this, Simon, right? And what he's talking about, right, is that does a king, collect from his own sons or from strangers? He collects from strangers, right? So Jesus is the Lord of the temple, right? And they are his sons, right? The believers. And so they wouldn't owe the tax. And they don't owe the tax. However, because Peter had already told them that yes, Jesus would pay the tax, that's why Jesus says, lest we offend them, right? We don't want to cause them to stumble. We don't want to cause confusion, right? They just need to move along through this little situation that kind of Peter kind of answered on his behalf and stumbled through that. And so we're not going to make this situation worse, right? So Jesus is like, we're just going to go pay it. But Jesus doesn't just toss him a coin, right? Peter has to do something. So Jesus actually performs a miracle on behalf of this, but Peter has to obey and go do this now. He doesn't just hand them a coin, right? You got to go cast a hook into the sea, right? And then you got to catch this fish. And when you do, you open its mouth. It's going to have a coin. And then you take that coin and go pay. So this would have been a whole shekel, half for each man, Jesus and Peter, which would have sufficed for the temple tax. And so that wraps up this section, guys. And I will see you guys again in the next one.